And I also would like to mention that as a young woman, young African woman especially, looking at getting into marriage, you should be patient enough and wait for the right man whom you're going to support, whom you're going to help, whom you're going to make a companion, and not pressure yourself into getting into a wrong relationship and end up regretting it. Because it's very typical to find in African communities that pressure is put on girls when they're over a certain age. Oh, when are you getting married? Oh, why are you not married? And all of that. And this, in recent times, has caused some women to put unnecessary pressure on themselves to say, hey, I have to get married by a certain age, or I'm above this age, why am I not married? And you find people getting into relationships that become a disaster because this pressure rids them of the ability to take time and study and understand and list their expectations of who they want to marry. Hello everyone, and welcome back to What Time Is It? The number one talk show where we share opinions about the African mentality, culture, development, entertainment, and lifestyle. Now, for those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Ntube Nane, and I am your host. Looking at the story of creation, we realize that the loneliness of a man is what triggers the creation of a woman to be a helper. Now, regardless of this fact, African women have an expectation when it comes to marriage. Now, in the previous video, we talked about the expectations of African men when it comes to marriage. And today I thought about I thought about just sharing ideas on what an African woman would typically expect when they're getting married or when they're planning to get married. Now, that said, we're going to go to point number one, which is basically the same for the men. An African woman or African women would typically want to get into a marriage for companionship. Now, if you didn't watch the previous video, please go ahead and do that. Companionship, someone basically entails someone to talk to, someone they can share their worries with, someone to pamper them. I know my ladies love pampering, so an African woman would typically expect companionship, and that's why it becomes a problem when these women try to have conversations with their husbands and the men sort of evade such conversations. I mean, you should know that an African woman is expecting a companion when they get married. Now, that said, let us move on to the next point, which is the same as the men. An African woman would typically want to get married to start a family, which is having children. And because the women are the ones tasked with carrying or actually carrying these children, it's the pride of an African woman to have your own kids. If you find yourself in a marriage and kids are not coming, trust me, typical African culture, everybody keeps asking the woman, why don't you have kids yet? Now, sometimes I ask myself, do you realize the man is the one who is tasked with getting the woman pregnant? Like, guys, please, let us stop putting pressure on African women when children are not coming. An African woman would want to get married because they want to have kids, but it is the man who gets them pregnant. And that said, another thing that I talked about on the video on men's expectations when it comes to marriage was the fact that a family for a typical African is not just for fun or for show, is so that the lineage can be continued, is to pass down the family name. It shows strength, it shows wealth when it comes to the African culture. Now, with the women have a problem when it comes to this part. When the woman has not had a son, right? I told you guys, men will cherish the male child an African man is not just wanting to have children, but he wants to have a son who would carry the name forward. Now, when it comes to the women have extra pressure to have a boy. Because if you don't have a boy, it's already technically telling you that your husband may get a second wife, or for those in the diaspora, this is what happens. The man just goes out there and has his child quietly and just does not tell you, which is, I mean, I'm laughing about it, but it really is not funny, you know. So the women have extra pressure to produce an heir. And I mean, when I see people who are educated doing these things, it just baffles me, because I ask, do you realize it's the man's responsibility to give the woman a boy or a girl? But let's not dwell on that in this video. The woman expects not only to have children, but to have at least one male child, because that is how her name is saved, or she just rescues her neck by doing that. Even though, I must emphasize, even though it's not her responsibility to have a boy child. That said, let us move on to the next point of what a woman or an African woman would typically expect in a man. Now, it's just but normal to say that an African woman will expect the man or her husband to be family oriented. Because think about it, the first goal of getting married is for companionship. The second is to have children, not just any kind of children, boys and girls. Now, because Africans are very big on respect, it's not a very easy task to raise a child by yourself. So an African woman would want that male figure, the leader of the house, to say, hey, you stop, especially raising boys, because I mean, boys are a little more difficult to handle than women. That's for a woman, you know. Sometimes we'll say boys are more headstrong. I mean, there's some girls who are more headstrong than boys, but hey, in a typical home, the father easily handles the boys versus the girls. So a woman would expect to have a man who is family oriented, not just for the children that they're about to make, but also a man who is open to having her family show up, taking care of her family, her parents, maybe her sisters, however the family dynamics are. And thankfully, I just said that. It brings me to one important point that I need to mention before I forget. The African culture of having your parents live with you, say when you have a child. Now, as per the African culture, when a woman gives birth, before, it used to happen where when you give birth, you leave your husband's house and go stay with your parents for a certain period of time so that your mom can help you with taking care of the child. And then when you're strong enough to deal with it by yourself, you come back home. Development has brought a huge change to this particular African tradition. Now, the woman will need her mom to come stay with her to help her take care of the child. Now, if your husband is not very family oriented, most of the times will object to a move like this. And especially because men don't just understand what childbearing actually does to a woman or how difficult it is, because they see the women just carrying everything with so much grace. Women, you're very strong, and I must applaud you for that. They see the women doing it and they feel like, it couldn't be that hard. Now, I always say this to people. If you have never been in a situation, empathize. Don't even try to say that you understand. No, you don't understand. If you've not done it before, you really, really cannot get it. And this is something that no matter how hard a man tries, you'll never understand what it means for a woman to push an entire human being out of her body. I'm not talking about raising kids that are already running around. I'm talking about just the act of carrying the child. Like a few months after a woman gives birth is when she needs a lot of support for herself. Now, that said, I don't want to digress too much on this video. Let's go to the next expectation an African woman would have when it comes to picking a husband or when she's going into a marriage. This is going to be a man who is a leader. Now, African women have in recent times been given the opportunity to lead. But I am very sure that we all would agree that leadership for women is limited, right? We come up with these excuses. Oh, the woman. I mean, you know what? Let's not go into the excuses. But we know all of those excuses that limit women when it comes to leadership. And besides that, nature just made it where the man is the leader of the home. Now, the women are very good managers. African women, for sure, can be very, very good managers when it comes to their homes. They can actually be good leaders, but for some weird reason or for some natural reason, leadership falls on the man. So leadership here is not just placing orders, do this, do that, and all of that. It's taking initiative, coming up with solutions. So when an African woman is getting married, she expects to have a man with good leadership qualities, because the African culture and tradition is a lot. When somebody dies, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's so many dynamics that I don't want to go into on this video, but just know that an African woman is looking for leadership, and said leadership takes a lot. Like, you need to have a lot of initiative, you need to understand what the culture is, that way you can act accordingly and lead your family as the woman would expect. And of course, I don't want to miss this point. A woman would typically expect someone who manages the emotions properly. Now, we all can say and agree that women can be very emotional. Now, if you're a man who does not understand how women's emotions are supposed to be managed, and your own emotions as a man, how to manage them, that becomes a problem. But when an African woman is looking at someone they want to marry or they would like to marry, they expect that this person can manage them emotionally and even manage their own selves. So that is something that we want to put a star on. Emotional management is a big expectation for African women when they are looking at marriage. Okay, the next point I'm going to talk about is a man who is ambitious, or a man who understands their purpose. Now, looking at the nature of Africa as a continent, or the conditions under which a lot of women grew up in when it comes to the African continent, you see that ambition is something that everyone craves for. Now, when you go on social media, read websites and all of that, you find out that Africa is considered one of the poorest continents. Not in terms of natural resources, it's just in terms of infrastructure. So everyone has as a goal to live a better life than their parents before them, or the generations before them. Now, because of this, and because of the fact that in the African culture or in the African cultural environment, the men are the ones charged with bringing such development or bringing such comfort to the home, it's only natural that an African woman would want a man who is ambitious. And this ambition is just providing comfort for her and the kids that she's going to have. Now, I'm not saying that there are any unambitious people, or, I don't think there's anyone who is unambitious, but just in case you're looking at getting married to an African woman, note that African women look for ambition when they're getting married. Okay. So the next thing an African woman would typically expect from a man when they're getting married is the ability to provide. Now, like I said before, and I've said this in a few other videos, African culture basically states that the man is the provider for the home. Now, this is providing a roof over their heads, providing tuition for kids, providing a lot of things that will help the family run smoothly. And to be honest, this is not very different for those who are living out of Africa. Those living in the diaspora, it's a little, the conditions under which people are living, the lifestyle and all of that has made it where women now pay bills, or African women living out of Africa pay bills and all of that. But typically, the man is expected to provide for the family. Like, your wife could be working and you still give her allowance. I mean, my mom does that, or my dad does that. So I don't know about your family, but yes, an African woman would expect the husband to provide for her, and to an extent provide for her immediate family as well, in case they need the help. So provision is something that you should put a note on. African women expect you to provide for them when you get married to them, or when they accept to marry you or eventually marry you. That said, let us move on to the next point. An African woman would typically expect strength in the man they marry. Now, a woman brings tenderness to a relationship. A man brings strength. We all have somehow come across the saying that women are roses, hence they're very fragile, they're very soft, love to look cute, and because of that, they're very tender, and we need to handle them with care. Now, if a man is not strong enough, they cannot handle that woman, or they cannot give the woman the chance to be as tender as they want to be. So when an African woman is looking for a husband to get married to, or to say yes to, they expect some level of strength. Strength not just in pampering the woman, strength for situations that are going to come up in that marriage. Because like I said, marriage is not a bed of roses. Marriage is not a smooth ride. Marriage is the start of a journey that doesn't end until one person drops, right? Or until one person, typically, is not supposed to end until one person passes. So because of that, an African woman will be expecting to see some level of strength physically, emotionally, and mentally when it comes to a man that she wants to marry. Now, that said, these are the points that I put together for the expectations African women have when they are looking for a spouse, or when they are looking for a life partner. And I also would like to mention that as a young woman, young African woman especially, looking at getting into marriage, you should be patient enough and wait for the right man whom you're going to support, whom you're going to help, whom you're going to make a companion, and not pressure yourself into getting into a wrong relationship and end up regretting it. Because it's very typical to find in African communities that pressure is put on girls when they're over a certain age. Oh, when are you getting married? Oh, why are you not married? And all of that. And this, in recent times, has caused some women to put unnecessary pressure on themselves to say, hey, I have to get married by a certain age, or I'm above this age, why am I not married? And you find people getting into relationships that become a disaster because this pressure rids them of the ability to take time and study and understand and list their expectations of who they want to marry. Now, that said, we have come to the end of this video. I do hope you enjoyed everything that I shared on the video. Please drop a comment and share your opinion. And like I would always say, sharing is caring and knowledge is power. Therefore, sharing knowledge is caring powerfully. So please like and share this video. And until next time, you have been watching What Time Is It? Ciao.